This Russian island is so remote that the first person to find this place in the 1870s literally named it Lonely Island. This island is called Uyedineniya, also known as Ensomheden, which in English translates to Lonely Island or Solitude. Looking at it from above, you can't see many features on it, and it is completely uninhabited right now. However, it wasn't always that way. In fact, when we look on this western side of the island, right in this little small ravine right here, we can see what appears to be a number of different buildings with roads connecting them, some barrels on the side, and some other stuff going on. However, the rest of the island has almost nothing going on. Today, we're going to be looking at old maps and old sources, like this one that shows Lonely Island, and this old map from 1878, which shows the original voyage of the first explorers to this island. We'll also look at some of the original documents describing this place, and what the island looks like today, including with photos, and by looking at a video from 2001, which showed a lot of insights on the island's history and what it looks like nowadays. Let's explore. So where even is Uyedineniya Island? I'm sorry about my pronunciation, but it's in the Krasnoyarsk Krai region of Russia, really far out there. And you can see why they call it Lonely Island. Let's zoom back on where the island is. There's just absolutely nothing anywhere close to this island. It's in the Kara Sea, and let's measure out the closest island. That would be 96 miles or 155 kilometers away. And even the islands that are close to here have no population or are very rarely visited. Unfortunately, a lot of the modern day maps of this island are very blurry. Like Google Maps, when you zoom in, shows very low resolution of this island. But other mapping services show this island really well. And it's cool to just zoom into this place. You can see on the left side of the island, it's much more hilly. And on the right side of the island, it looks very flat and very barren. After scanning this island for a while, I could only find the structures that were in this little ravine on the west side of the island, and there's quite a few of them. There's at least 9 buildings right here, and then just to the north of that, there's 4, 5, or 6 more buildings up here. But most attempts of looking at this island from afar just show it as a very blurry figure. But like I talked about in the intro of this video, we're going to be diving into some primary and secondary sources and maps from back in the day to actually discover the true history of this place. Here's one of them from 1914, which simply shows Lonely Island with hardly any other info on it, and it shows it as being very lonely and nothing around here. Here's another map from the site Old Maps in 1879, so this is only a year after this island was discovered. We're far up in the Arctic Ocean up here, and you can see just little Lonely Island up here, nothing around it, no other notes about it. Now, I managed to track down some of the original documents describing the discovery of this island. This book was published in 1881, and it's called The Voyage of the Vega Around Asia and Europe. If you go to page 335, they describe the discovery of this island, but they actually don't make a big note about it, and they really would just dedicate one paragraph to it. They talk about Captain Edward Johannesson when he was traveling on the vessel Nordland from Tromsø, Norway. He left this journey on the 22nd of May, 1878, and he went through the Kara Sea around August. At one point, he circumnavigated a brand new island that hadn't been discovered yet, and they named it Ensamheten. They put in parentheses Solitude. They say the island was free of snow, but not overgrown with grass. They saw some bears, bearded seals, terns, fulmars, ivory gulls, and a bird with a rounded tail and a long bill. They named it Solitude Island because of the remote position and desolate appearance of the island. And then after going around the island, they simply left and didn't talk about it again. This map was published in 1879, and it described Captain Edward Johannesson's journey around the Kara Sea. This is a really cool map. I love when they do day-by-day travels like this. And if we zoom in all the way up here, we can see Einsamkeit Island, which is the German translation for it. You can see they're wandering their way up around August, and it hit August 25th, 26th. They're just going north. It looks like on August 26th they must have spotted the island because they beelined directly towards it. And they actually spent quite a few days going around it. You can see all the way up to September 3rd, they were still circumnavigating the island and describing what it looked like. And honestly, the island is not far off of what it actually looks like today. Today it's a bit more oblong. It could have been more north or south, or they could have just mischarted it just a bit. But anyway, around September 3rd, they eventually decided to head out from here. Here's the original source for that map as well, with a whole page dedicated to describing that journey and about discovering Einsamkeit Island. Now, I was looking for newspaper articles describing the discovery of this place, and there were quite a few. The very first one I could find was from the St. Louis Dispatch, Monday, November 11th, 1878. So only about 2.5 months after the discovery of the island, which is pretty quick for back then. And they have a section of the newspaper article called Post Pencillings, A lot of these are supposed to be humorous or kind of satirical. And I found this one really funny. They say a new polar island has been discovered. They say the name of the island, which is called Loneliness in English. This discovery is timely since the election. Dennis Carney and General Butler have been looking for some lonely spots in which to pass the remainder of their days, and Ensomheden will suit them to a T. I had no idea who these two guys were, so I looked them up on Wikipedia, and they weren't super well liked. They had a lot of controversial opinions and takes, so I can see why. This newspaper article from the Indiana Progress, December 5th, 1878, has some more information about it. They say they announced the island from a telegram from Tromsø, and they also say they discovered the island on September 3rd, which doesn't seem right because it looks like they discovered it around August 26th. They also said there's evidence that the Gulf Stream touched the west coast of the island, which is why the island wasn't completely snow-capped. There's also a mention of the discovery of the island in 1880 from a U.S. Virgin Islands newspaper, interestingly. There's not a lot of information about Edward Johannesson. There is this family website about him. They describe him as a famous cousin and do talk about some of the other stuff he got up to. There's this really cool newspaper article that I would have loved to read back in 1902, and it's even cool today. They actually mentioned Vostok Island, which I covered in a previous video that a lot of you guys liked. And it seems like a lot of the islands that they cover on this newspaper article would be good ones for a video. But one of the islands that they do talk about is the island that this video is about. Einsamkeit, or Uyedineniya. They also talk about the Gulf Stream going by it, which keeps it relatively warm for the area, and a lot of driftwood on it, so you can make a little house. In 1909, from the Houston Post, they made this really good article that shows a timeline of Arctic expeditions and has a lot of good info in here, basically something for every single year. In 1878, that was the most notable thing. Oh, going back to this newspaper article about islands without owners, they actually mentioned Doherty Island, which I've mentioned in the past, but it's actually a phantom island. Yep, this island did not exist at all. Same with this one right here under Australia called Royal Company Islands. These were also phantom islands that were really popular back in the day. And I do plan on making a video covering the Doherty Islands, Royal Islands, and a couple other phantom islands in the South Pacific soon. But from this map in the Chicago Tribune in 1914, they do actually mention the island way up here. And this island was super popular for being described as a lonely place, I guess given the name. It's the same thing that I'm doing in this video, but the New York Herald described it as a place where you can find solitude. The next part of the history of this island actually has to do with this guy, Mr. Uyedineniya. And as he was on this island, he actually discovered the cervical vertebrae of a plesiosaur. This article is one of the only sources I could find about it. It's titled Northernmost Occurrences of Plesiosaurs and Turtles. And if we come all the way down here, we do actually see that they briefly mention that there is cervical centrum found on Uyedineniya Island. And they do cite the same source that Wikipedia cites for it, yet I can't find the original source. Now, you might be asking, when did this polar station pop up? Well, it has a very interesting history as well. Back in the 1930s, there was a small polar observatory that was built on this island. It wasn't near what we see today with all of these buildings here. It was just a small one. But on September 8th, 1942, the German armies released submarine U-251 under Operation Wonderland. And the submarine came all the way up to this island and actually just destroyed the whole polar station while there was people on it. This is one of the only sources I could find describing what happened on that day. It's an old article from 2004, and let's scroll down to the point where they talk about Solitude Island. Here's some pictures of what some of these polar stations looked like back then, although these aren't on Uyedineniya Island. They wrote a whole section about the polar front line, and again, all these links are in the description, so you can read them in their entirety there. But they said, on the morning of September 8th, the submarine U-251 fired for half an hour at the polar station of the island of Solitude, or Uyedineniya Island, on which there were 7 people. 3 shells hit a residential building, several in a radio station. More than 20 fell in the area of the wind turbine, but the radio equipment was not damaged. And after the end of the bombing, the station continued to operate. And remarkably, none of the 7 people that were stationed there died from it. In the paragraph after that, they described something even weirder. Soon it became the scene of another tragedy. I guess at some point, a barrel of alcohol, they say apparently methyl, floated to the shore, and the polar explorers or the people who were at the stations could not overcome the temptations after being exhausted by a long winter. And then they just simply say a new grave appeared on the deserted shores. So I'm guessing someone drank this methyl vessel and then ended up dying. They say one of the meteorologists who was here for 4 years stayed on the island forever. Next, during the Cold War, this station got a lot of upgrades, and they built many of these buildings here for weather observation and who knows what else. There's all sorts of these polar stations that were built on these Russian remote islands back then, and they say it was just for meteorological observation, but probably for other reasons as well. Almost couldn't find any information about what happened on this specific island with its weather station, but this video, 2001 Lost Island Russian Arctic Iota de-expedition, is freaking amazing and showed a lot of the history of this place. They have a huge segment dedicated to just this island alone, and they talked about the history of it. So I'll summarize that here. It starts at 29:30 in the video. When they helicopter over to the island, they want to use their amateur radio equipment and look at some of the old buildings from 5 years ago that were abandoned. They had problems with their generator originally, but eventually got it up and running. And they went in the buildings and started to use a lot of the equipment from there. You can see it's super, super cold in this building. There's no heating right now. And here's what it looks like from the outside. Clearly this is the winter time, as in the summer there's honestly not too much snow there. They made communications with lots of different people while on this island. And they talk a bit about what happened back in 1996, why everyone bailed on the place. This was after the end of the Cold War. And they said on November 26, 1996, there was almost no fuel left on the place. And they're basically told that no more fuel was going to be given to the island. And there was one aircraft that was coming in like a couple of days that was going to pick them up. And that was the only chance they had to get off the island. So in a hurry, the people that were living on the polar station packed up their stuff in like one bag and then never ended up returning. So a lot of the buildings looked like they were just abandoned with a lot of the stuff in it. This polar station was honestly pretty good. They even had a movie room in there, which is cool. And a lot of the weather parts work from a nuclear battery. They also made contact with these guys who I guess were going up to the North Pole or some of those other Arctic polar islands. And these things are super cool. I want to ride in these. Nowadays, there's not too much more going on this island. I did find this photo from 2014 that showed one of the buildings there. It's not looking like it's in very good shape anymore. And you can see all the fuel barrels that have just been kind of thrown out. But I saw this article from 2022, and there's actually some good news about things going on this place now. On August 7th of 2022, they installed an automatic meteorologic station on this island. They also showed some more pictures of what this place looks like in the summer. You can see it's also not looking like it's in great shape. There's a whole bunch of fuel barrels over here, but the building still looks somewhat livable if you do get stranded on this place. They also show what looks like a very old picture of it in the winter here, and describe that same story about the 1942 German submarine who came up to this island and destroyed a lot of it. So that's basically the history of this island with all the sources that I could find and all the old newspaper articles and pictures. Hope you enjoyed me talking about this place. Let me know what islands I should cover next. I'm definitely going to cover some more Phantom Islands and then some of the US minor outlying islands as well. I see a lot of your guys' comments, and thank you so much for all your recommendations. I'll try to get to them eventually, but you guys have so many cool places to explore. If you made it this far in the video, please consider giving the video a like and subscribing. It'd mean a lot. Yeah, anyways, thanks for watching.